We continue now at the top of Daf Chesam and Beis and Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 8b. On the previous Amud, the Gemara brought a brisa which said, let's say a person buys from the seller, the buyer buys from the seller three kinds of property. He buys all of the person's property, the Idius, the Baininus, and Ziborius, and that seller, he owed money for damages. He also owed money to a creditor. He also owed money for Ksubas Isha. So the brisa said that person who bought the property, he has to pay. Each one collects according to what they're normally supposed to collect. Nizakan collect the Idius, Baal Cho Bebaininus, Ksubas Isha is Biziborius. And the Gemara had said it can't be that he bought it all at once, because that would be too obvious. We already said if three people buy the property all at once, that's exactly what the halach is. For sure that would be the halach if one person bought all of that property all at once. And so then the Gemara said really the case is that he bought it in sequence. He bought the Ziborius and then he bought the Baininus, and the point is that he bought the Edius last. Now since he bought the Edius last, really everybody should be able to collect from the Edius, because that was B'nei Chorin. That was property that was really by the person, the seller who owed all of that, who owed all of these people money. He had that property, and so therefore in terms of the other property, the buyer can say, when I bought the Ziborius, I left property for you to collect from. When I bought the Baininus, I left property, I left the Edius for you to collect from, and therefore he can make them collect all from, therefore in general, they really should be able to collect from the Edius, but he doesn't want that. He doesn't want them to collect from the Edius, of course, because that's the best property, and so therefore what he's able to say is, he can say, you know what, still, even though really you should be able to collect from the Edius, but I'm going to force you to all collect from your normal amount, from your normal property you're supposed to collect from. Why? Because if you don't do that, I'm going to return the shtar of the Ziborius to the original owner, and you'll be forced to collect the Ziborius because that'll be by the original owner. And therefore, since I could in theory do that, therefore you're not allowed to all just take from the Edius because that was the last property that I bought. But the Gemara says if that's the case, if the person buying the property has this ability to say that I can just return the Ziborius shtar to the original owner and make you take from that, and therefore you should all take according to your normal halacha, so b'nizaken nami neim hachi, with that argument, even by the nizaken, meaning even the person he damaged, the person who was damaged, who was collecting from the Idius, he can tell him the same thing. He can say that I can, in theory, return the Ziborius shtar to the original owner, and you also have to take from the Ziborius. They all should have to take from the Ziborius, according to that answer. And so the Gemara says that cannot be what's going on. Elachav mayaskin, and rather you have to say here in this brisa, what are we talking about? B'yasmin, we're talking actually about orphans, meaning the people selling the property is not the original person that owes all of these debts. It's actually the orphans. Now the halach is when it comes to the orphans, they don't have to pay any of those debts of their father except from the actual property that they inherit from the father, where there's a lien on that property. So we're talking over here b'yasmin by orphans. The lav b'nei piron, and they're not really responsible to pay. V'shibud the delay alei didei ramya, and therefore the shibud really is on this property that was sold to all of these to this person who bought the property. That's where the shibud is, and he's not able to say I'm going to return to the original owner, meaning here the Yisomim, I'm going to return to the Yisomim Ziborius, then you have to take Ziborius. That's not true over here. Yisomim would not be responsible in that fashion. The shibud really is on the person who has that property of the fathers, which is this individual, and therefore he doesn't have that argument at all. But the problem is if he doesn't have that argument at all, and he bought the Edius last, so then on the contrary, so again, Hilkach Lekel Meimer Hachi, therefore he's not able to say that. So the question is, well then why is he able to say? Why is it that he's able to say you can't take from the Edius, you have to take from whatever you're normally supposed to collect from? Alamisham Damar Lahu, the real reason is because this buyer who has this property, and again there's Yisomim involved over here, he has this property from the Yisomim, he can say to them as follows: the reason why you can't take from the Edius, Taima Mai Omer Rabbanan, because what's the reason that the Rabbanan said Ein Nifroin Min Chasen Mishubadim B'Makom Sheyesh B'nei Chorin? Why is it that the Rabbanan said you can't collect from Mishubadim if there are B'nei Chorin? Mishum Takanta Didi, that's really just for my benefit, meaning for the benefit of the buyers, for the benefit of the Lekuchos, we say you don't go to them first, you should go to the original person who owes the money. You should go to the B'nei Chorin first. But over here, in this case, if you're going to do that, you're going to take away my Edius. I don't like that takana, because in this case, I ended up buying everything. So just because I bought the Edius last doesn't mean that you're all going to collect from the Edius. I don't want the takana d'Rabbanan. Let's go to the original, the normal standard way of collecting, meaning again, the nizak and b'Edius b'alcho b'beininus and ksubas isha b'ziborius. And that follows Rava. Kid Rava, it's like Rava said. The Yamar Rava, because Rava said, anybody who says, I don't want the Takonos Chacham that was supposed to be for my benefit, like this example, which we'll explain in a moment, Shomin Lo, we do listen to that person. My Kagonzu, what is this example of a case where a person can say, I don't want the Takona that was for my benefit? Kid Rav Huna, it's like Rav Huna said. The Yamar Rav Huna, because Rav Huna said, a wife can say to her husband, Eini nizonos, I don't need your mizonos, I don't want your support. However, ve'eini osa. However, I'm not going to do work, and the money that I make, what I earn, that's not going to go to you. I'm going to keep that. I don't want that takana, because normally there's a takana on behalf of the wife that she gets mizonos, she gets supported from the husband, and then in exchange, any work she does, so the earnings go to the husband. But she can say, I don't want this takana. The takana was made for my benefit. I don't want it. I would rather work and keep the earnings for myself and not be supported by your mizonos. And Rashi explains, B'nizaken nami neimahachi, again, if the person who bought the property is able to say, I'm going to return the ziborius, and therefore you're going to have to collect ziborius, so rather instead, just collect according to the standard approach. Ibois lemishkal beinanis shkol, if you want to take beinanis, take it. V'lo, and if not, mahadrena shtar the ziborius, lamar, I'll put you even in a worse position. Meaning he's telling the person who was damaged, take the beinanis, don't take the edges. If you take the beinanis, fine. If not, I'll put you in a worse position. I'll return the shtar of the ziborius to the original owner. But tishkol ziborius bal karchach, he'll be forced to collect from the ziborius. V'amai yoiv lei idyus. The point is, why would he even have to give idyus to the person who was damaged? Elami de lo toin hachi, from the fact that the person is not saying that, bal karchach b'hachi askinan. So that's why the Gemara said it must be the Bryce is talking about the following case. Kagon shemeis hamocher. The case actually is that the seller of all this property, the seller is also the one who owes all these people the money, he died. V'keven shelo hiniach karka, and since he didn't leave over land, ein hayisomim b'nei piron. The yisomim really don't have to pay. They're not responsible at all that land, he died. He sold all of his property to this individual. He died. The yisomim have no responsibility. To metaltli the yasmin lebalchov lo mishtapli. The halach is metaltlin when it comes to a balchov. The yisomim don't have to pay a balchov with metaltlin, movable property. It's only land that they inherit that they owe. And even if he goes ahead and returns one of the pieces of property, which is the whole thing he's trying to do over here, to return the ziborius to the original owner, in this case the yisomim, that won't work. That's Yisomim who purchased land. Let's say Yisomim purchased land after their father died. They don't owe that land. So therefore, in this situation, talking about orphans, they have no responsibility whatsoever in this case. He's the only one that has the property. He bought all of the property from the original owner. He can't say, I'll return the ziborius to the orphans, and then you'll need to take ziborius. He doesn't have that claim. And so that's why, again, the Gemara went on to say that the case is that his actual claim is, this whole takana was made for my benefit. I don't want it in this situation. I don't want the takana that was made for my benefit in this case. Everyone should take according to the standard. Rashi just points out, the reason why the Gemara is only asking from nizaken and not balchov, why not make the same argument? I'll return the shtar of the ziborius, you'll have to take ziborius. But that won't make sense, says Rashi. Because then what's the threat? Ishakal ziborius shko, what's the threat? The threat would be, don't take beinanis, take ziborius, or else I'll make you take ziborius. That doesn't make sense. If you don't take ziborius, I'm going to return the shtar of the ziborius, v'tishkol minei, and then you'll collect ziborius. So that wouldn't be a normal threat. Matzi Amarle, the guy could say, in other words, the wife could say, okay, when you return it, I'll take the ziborius, but you're not going to make me take ziborius now. You're trying to make me take ziborius now because in theory you could make me take ziborius. That wouldn't be a normal threat. That makes more sense by Nizakin, where he says to the guy, take the beinanis, or else I'll return the shtar of the ziborius and force you to take ziborius. This is a language, again, of a question. The Gemara was saying, in a situation of Yisomim, there is no claim the guy's making. So what is the claim anyway? If that's the case, why aren't they all collecting from Edyus? That was the last thing that the person purchased that had the status of B'nai Chorin last. And then the Gemara answered, the reason why they can't collect from Edyus, because he can say to them, what's the whole reason why a person doesn't collect from Meshubadim if they're B'nai Chorin? It's for the benefit of the purchaser. I don't want that takana shkilu kedinaychu, take according to the standard halach and nizaken with Edyus, balcho bebeinanis and ksubas isha, busy borius. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Pshita, it is obvious. Machar lokeach beinanis v'ziborius. Let's say a lokeach, a person who purchased, he sold away the beinanis and the ziborius. Ziborius. V'shayir Edius lefanav, and he left the Edius in front of him, that he left. So leisu kulu v'ligvu me'edius. So in such a situation, they all go ahead and they're going to collect from the Edius to Achroni, because that was the last one. Rashi explains, Pshita b'nichusa, this is just, the Gemara is just explaining that this is obvious. Mocher lokach, meaning, shalokach idius b'achrona. Let's go on the case we had before. This person who bought all of the property from the person who owed, there was a seller that owed ksubas isha, he owed a balchov, he owed nezikin, and in such a situation, again, a person purchased all of that guy, a person purchased all of the seller's property from him, and he bought the idius last. So really, again, in theory, they're all supposed to be taken from the idius, but we already said he can say, in such a situation, I don't want that takana d'Rabbanan. Everyone should take according to the standard halacha. So let's say in such a situation, this lokach went ahead, he sold the Beinanis and Ziborius, and now all he has is Edius. So Beinanis v'Ziborius v'Shayir Edius lefanov. Again, he sold the Beinanis and Ziborius, and he kept the Edius. So in that situation, everyone collects from the Edius to Achronihi, because that's the last one. V'Shibudayu ala Ramya. The Shibud really is on the Edius. Ubeinanis holesle, and he doesn't have the Beinanis hashta, the Matzi l'meimar gavi, meaning he can't tell the guy, collect from the Beinanis. He doesn't have the Beinanis anymore. The lo nichali b'takanta. He can't make that claim and say, I don't want the takana d'Rabbanan, therefore you should go to the Beinanis. He can't say that because he's not holding the Beinanis. He gave it up. He's not holding the Ziborius. He gave it up. All he's got left is the Edius. So now at this point in time, they're going to collect from the Edius. Again, the Ha'achronihi, that was the last one. Ubeinanis v'Ziborius lesnu gabe. He doesn't have the Beinanis and Ziborius anymore. The Matzi l'meimar lu gavu mi Beinanis b'Ziborius. Then he'd be able to say, take from the Beinanis and Ziborius the lo nichali b'takanta d'Rabbanan, because I don't want the takana of the d'Rabbanan, that the B'nei Chorin, as long as there's B'nei Chorin, you don't collect from Mishubanim. He can't say that anymore. He doesn't have that. Aval, but what about in the following situation? Aval machar idius v'shayir Beinanis v'Ziborius mai. What happens if the person sold the Edius and he left with him the Beinanis and Ziborius? So what would happen in that situation? He no longer has the Edius. What happens in that case? Rashi over here explains, what happens? Mi'azli kulu basar lokach beis. Maybe everybody goes now to the second lokach, the guy he sold the Edius to. Sharehu lokach shibudayo, because he really took what they really have a shibud on. The real shibud is on the Edius, because that was the last thing that the first purchaser bought. That was the B'nei Chorin last. Now that piece of property is going on to a second purchaser. Maybe they all go over there. Umilokeach rishon lo gava. Maybe they don't collect anything from the first purchaser. Do amar ba'ina b'takanta d'Rabbanan, because now he'll say, I like that original takana d'Rabbanan, that the last thing that I buy is what you go to. V'idis dehavoy baschorin b'shtei lekuchos harishonos shalachemi, and therefore when it comes to the Idius, which was Baschorin, that was free property when I was buying the original things. When I bought the two original purchases of the Ziborius and the Beinanis, I left the Idius. That's really yours. I really like that Takana d'Rabbanan. I want you to take from that. What would be the halacha? Do they go to the second lokach and get the Idius? And so Savar Abai Lamemer. So Abai thought to say in that case, Asu Kulu Gavam Idius. Indeed, that's exactly what happens. They all go ahead and they collect from the Idius, they collect from the second lokach. And the Gemara says, Amar le Rava, so Rava says back to Abaye, that's not true. Because ma'amocha rishon l'sheni, because when the first person, what is he selling to the second person? Kol zuchus shetav liyado. Any zuchus, any good argument in his favor that he had, now goes to the second purchaser as well. V'keivan de'ilu asu gavi lokeach rishon, and therefore, since if they would have collected from the first lokeach, matzi agvi l'hume beinanis v'ziborius, he has that argument, and he could say, I want you to take from beinanis v'ziborius. He could tell the balchov, he could tell the ksubas isha, I want you to take from that. He's able to make that argument. And even though at the time that he bought the Beinanis and Ziborius, the Idis was B'nei Chorin, but still he's able to make that argument. Generally, you don't collect from the Nechasim Meshubadim if they're a B'nei Chorin, so he's able, even though really it should be the collection from the Edius, that first Lokeach, as we said, is able to say, sorry, you cannot collect from the Edius. I don't want that takana that was for my benefit, and now it's not for my benefit. But Matzi Amar Le Lo Nichali B'Hai Takana. Again, he's able to say, I don't want that takana, and therefore you have to take from the Beinanis v'Ziborius. So once he has that power, says Rava Lokeach Sheni Nami. When it comes to the second purchaser as well, Matzi Amar Le, he can say Gavi Beinanis v'Ziborius. You have to collect from the Beinanis and Ziborius. Techizavin Lokeach Sheni Adaita Dechol Zuchusa Dehavali L'Rishon Begavazavin. Because anytime a second purchaser is purchasing, he's on the understanding that I have all of the rights that the first purchaser had. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Ruvain shamachar kol sadosav l'Shimon. Let's say Ruvain sells all of his fields to Shimon. V'halach Shimon umachar sada achas l'Levi. And Shimon goes ahead and he sells one of the fields to Levi. Uva balchov de Ruvain. And then the balchov, the creditor of Ruvain, the original person who sold all of his fields, he comes. Ratza mizagov, ratza mizagov. If he wants, he can collect from Shimon. If he wants, he can collect from Levi. V'lo amar nala dezavan beinanis. Now that's only true if he sold the beinanis property. Zavan Idius v'Ziborius, but let's say Shimon sold to Levi the Idius or the Ziborius, so then he's not able to collect from Levi, and then at that point he's going to collect from Shimon. Because Levi can say that was the whole point. That's why I was so careful to buy only the Idius and Ziborius. That was land that wasn't fit for you. I knew that you generally as a Balchov collect from Beinanis, and therefore you have to go to Shimon and collect the land from him. And even in a situation where Levi purchased Beinanis, we also do not say that he can collect from Levi, unless he didn't leave over Beinanis, similar Beinanis by Shimon. Then he can't say, I left you something to collect by Shimon. But if he left similar Beinanis by Shimon, so lo gavi minei, that he's not able to collect from him from Levi, because Levi can tell the person who's collecting, I left you some property by Shimon that you can collect from him. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaya says, Ruvain shamachar sada l'Shimon ba'achrayas. Let's say Ruvain sells a field to Shimon, and he takes achrayas, he takes responsibility on that field. He says that if that field is taken from you, so then I'm going to owe you. V'yasa balchov de Ruvain v'taraf mishimon. Now a creditor of Ruvain comes, and he tries to collect that field from Shimon. So dinahu da'azul Ruvain u'mishtoi dina ba'adei. So the halacha is that Ruvain's allowed to go to court and try to show that he doesn't really owe the money to that balchov. V'lo matzi amarle, and the balchov can't say to him, lav bal devarim didiyat, that you're not really the litigant over here. I'm trying to argue with Shimon. I have nothing to do with you. You can't take me to court. No, he can't say that. Diamarle, because Ruvain can say to him, imafkis minei olai hadar. If you take that property from him, from Shimon, Shimon's going to come to me. I took responsibility on that property, and therefore I am involved in this case. Just because you're trying to get the property from Shimon does not mean that I'm not involved. And there are those that say, even if he sold the property to Shimon and he took no responsibility, he said to Shimon, if this land gets collected from you by a creditor, I am not going to pay you back. But still, Ruvain is allowed to get involved in the court case and try to show that the Baal Chov is not owed any money. Because Ruvain can say to him, it's not pleasing to me that Shimon has a complaint against me. I don't want Shimon to complain, and therefore you're coming along trying to take Shimon's property, even though I'm not going to be responsible for that whatsoever, but still I am considered to be a litigant in this case. I'm allowed to get involved in the case and try to show that I don't owe you the money, that you're not able to collect from Shimon. And the Gemara continues, V'yamar Abai, and Abai says, Ruvain shamachar sada l'Shimon shelo b'achrayas. If Ruvain sells a field to Shimon, and again he doesn't take any responsibility, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tes Amud Aleph.